questions of relativism and human rights. Whether human rights are relative to a particular society or to a particular cultural tradition, or whether they are universal, and what are the problems on that. And I focus again there on an old discussion by now on whether human rights are compatible with Asian values. But again, I have picked this because I think some of the issues are also important in some of the countries that you are familiar with already. Tomorrow morning we continue discussing relativism. As you will have seen, if you had time to look through some of the readings, I discussed quite many objections that have been raised in the Asian values debate, and so I will repeat some of those. And then tomorrow after the tea, I thought we would then move to discuss some issues of the methodology of philosophical research on human rights. Some of you are philosophers, some of you are lawyers, some are sociologists, some even have a combination of competence. So I hope, again, it will be of some interest. I will mainly be presenting again some of the things that have been distributed in the writings before the course. But I will add some objections, add some observations. I am very concerned that you can follow what I say. I want to have some presentations, and then I want to split us into groups, perhaps 5 different groups, to discuss, and then to join again for discussions before I continue with my presentation. If people want to ask questions in Russian or Swedish or some other language, this is fine. I will then just have a translation in English before I answer. But very often I think the discussion will go not from you to me, but between you, which is good. It is more important for me that we have good discussions. I have many files, many PowerPoints. That is not important. Most of what I have to say, it can be found in the texts. So it is not important for me to be finished with this. It is more important to have good discussions and that we learn from each other. Is this speed of talking okay? Yeah. People can follow okay? Then we move to the first discussion about the historical roots. I will aim to be finished with one session by 11:30, because then there is tea upstairs. If I forget to look at the watch, you have to remind me, okay? This is important. Tea is even more important than philosophy, sometimes. So I want us to look at some of the historical roots of human rights. You've already had other presentations on this topic. I want to give it, I think, a somewhat different angle for the discussions. Namely, mainly the Confucian tradition of Asia, but also what we find in the Russian Orthodox Church. Today, very few governments will admit that they commit major human rights violations. Very few countries, very few states admit that they torture prisoners or that they allow slavery. But the universal acceptance of human rights is not complete. I recently studied what is called the Declaration of Human Dignity and Rights, which came from the 10th World Council of Russian People. Does anybody know this? Is this familiar? Chris. Have you heard of this declaration? Everybody knows about it, or some people know about it? I have read it in some detail, and I would want to remind you about some points. The declaration, expressing some of the views of the Russian Orthodox Church, holds that there are values that are no less important than human rights. These values include faith, morality, the sanctity of holy objects, and one's homeland. These values are at least as important as human rights, says this declaration. So what does that mean? The realization of human rights must never conflict with religious or moral traditions, must never insult religious or national feelings, and human rights must never threaten the existence of the homeland. This is again from the English translation of the Declaration. So what is the role then of human rights? How important are human rights in this declaration? The rights and freedoms of man are important, says the Declaration, to the extent that they help the individual to ascend to goodness. Human rights are important if they help save the individual from internal and external evil. And human rights are important if they help integrate the individual into society. This again is from the Declaration. When the individual pursues his interests or her interests, it has to be respectful of the interests of neighbors, family, nation, and humankind. Okay, so this is a particular understanding of the role of human rights in society. Many others hold that human rights should be a constraint on the culture. Human rights should constrain the government, the nation, and the interests of the government, which is a very different view of the role of human rights. And in particular, there was a big discussion now 15 years ago about whether human rights, in that sense, as a constraint on the culture of the country and the authorities of the country, whether that is compatible with other traditions than the particular Western tradition of the United States and parts of Europe. I am suggesting when we read the document from the Russian Orthodox Church, that is a different approach, a different understanding of human rights. It is quite similar, I think, in some ways to what has been sometimes regarded as the Asian tradition. There are claims that Confucius thought emphasizes respect to authority, respect for hierarchical social structures, respect for harmonious development, that is more important than the rights of individuals. And I think perhaps there are some similarities in this Confucian understanding of rights and that of the Russian Orthodox Church, at least of the document that is presented. So I would want to start us with a discussion about some of these issues. I am not interested now, but perhaps over dinner, why the Russian Orthodox Church makes this statement. The political setting, I think, is important, but my concerns now are somewhat different. They are more theoretical, more philosophical. Are there plausible criticisms against human rights? As you have been discussing now during the last almost week, that we can find in the statement of the Orthodox Church, that there are conflicts between human rights and national culture against conflicts between human rights and the true morality and so forth. Do some of these criticisms make sense? Do you think that they have that they are sound? The Orthodox Church claims that the distinct Russian civilization must be protected, respected. Are human rights, as you understand it, compatible with what the declaration claims to be the distinct Russian civilization. Are these objections, some of these objections, do you think that they are shared with the Confucian tradition to be obedient towards authority? And if so, the discussions about the Confucian respect for human rights may be of interest. So these are three questions. I would suggest that we now break into groups and have a discussion about these issues. I'd say 20-25 minutes, and then we get together here again, and I would like to hear some observations. We will not be able to complete the discussion, but at least to get some shared views from the groups.